unsuccessfully from a program contractor, actions that might qualify them for junior management positions at Halliburton. The report also blamed the Security Council and its Sanctions Committee, which means primarily Washington, for tolerating smuggling that went on outside the Oil for Food program and that benefited countries like Turkey, Jordan, and Syria. The scale of corruption is illustrated by the final estimates. Saddam Hussein skimmed $1.8 billion in kickbacks and surcharges from the United Nations-run program. The surcharges were almost all skimmed with Washington's authorization. The kickbacks substantially involved U.S. corporations. The Commission chose not to investigate an estimated $9 billion in oil for food surpluses handed over to the U.S. occupation authorities, which apparently disappeared. The end result of the Volcker inquiry is therefore barely detectable. But by doctrinal fiat, its revelations are the largest fraud ever recorded in history, the Wall Street Journal editors declared with mock outrage. They also joined the impassioned call for radical reform of the UN to deal with its waste, mismanagement, and corruption, doubtless real, and presumably the responsibility of the UN Undersecretary Generals for Management, who are regularly Washington political appointees. In its final compilation on business corruption, the Volcker Commission identified thousands of companies engaged in illegal surcharges and kickbacks, along with a number of individuals, including fugitive financier Mark Rich, granted a presidential pardon by Clinton as he left office. It also faulted the Security Council, that is, the United States, for failure to monitor the corruption. Even though we are looking at it from the outside, it kind of screams out at you, Volcker said. Why didn't somebody blow a whistle? The central point is that it all adds up to the same story. You need some pretty thoroughgoing reforms at the UN. One of Volcker's investigators answered his question about whistleblowers. Allowing billions of dollars of oil to flow illegally to the benefit of the economies of American allies, including Jordan and Turkey, he said, had a compromising effect on the Security Council's willingness to step in and stop the practice. After these vast illegal flows, he asked, "You're going to be very strict about this smaller volume of oil?" Unlikely. To put it less obliquely, the United States, which monitored the program with a hawk's eye, was compromised by its crucial role in illegal support for Saddam, and was not in a position to blow a whistle about far smaller sums, which implicated many U.S. companies. Doubtless, pretty thoroughgoing reforms are needed in many places, but the central point is that the UN, with all its faults, does not rank very high among them. Most of the energy corporations involved in illicit oil surcharges covered their tracks by resort to intermediaries, the Volcker report concluded, but not all. One major oil company was shamed by the 623-page report, Texaco, part of Chevron. There is some poetic justice, perhaps, in Texaco's unique role, not just because of the Texas connection. In the late 1930s, Texaco, then run by an open pro-Nazi, diverted oil shipments from the Spanish Republic to Franco in violation of contract, as well as of official U.S. government orders, while the State Department pretended not to see that the fascist forces invading Spain were receiving from the United States the one critical commodity that Nazi Germany and fascist Italy could not provide. The left-wing press was able to discover it, and later it was officially conceded. Similarly, when Clinton was undermining the embargo against Haiti's vicious terrorist junta, it was Texaco that was authorized to violate the presidential directive against shipping oil, the crucial commodity needed to maintain the terror. So the circle hasn't turned too far. While Sivan's $150,000 was a major story for months, one would be hard-pressed to find a report of his July 1999 appeal to the Security Council, warning that the improvement of the nutritional and health status of the Iraqi people through a multi-sectoral approach is being seriously affected as a result of the excessive number of holds placed on supplies and equipment for water, sanitation, and electricity. Most were blocked by U.S. objections, including switches, sockets, window frames, ceramic tiles and paint, heart and lung machines, and many other items of paramount importance to the welfare of the Iraqi people, Kofi Annan reported, while urging the Security Council to relax interventions that were seriously impairing the effective implementation of the program to provide desperately needed humanitarian assistance. Unilateral U.S. sanctions, even apart from those under a UN cover, as in Iraq, overwhelm all others in scale. When powerful states are opposed to international sanctions, they simply evade them by one or another device. U.S. evasion of UN sanctions against South Africa during the Reagan years, and of OAS sanctions against the terrorist military junta in Haiti under Bush I and Clinton, to mention two examples. Those who have attended to the history of sanctions will not be surprised to learn that U.S. sanctions on Iran are perceived by Iranian reformers as harmful to their cause. One of Iran's most influential intellectuals, Saeed Hajjarian, warns that America is looking for any excuse, the nuclear issue, terrorism, human rights, the Middle East peace process, to impose pressures on Iran, which often make the situation here more militarized, and in such an atmosphere democracy is killed. Known as the brain of the reformists, Hajjarian was shot in the face by a Muslim militant in 2000, and though slowly recovering, he is a reminder of the price some Iranians have paid for reform. He remains an opponent of sanctions which hurt the people, he says, and undermine democracy and reform, rejecting the comparison to South Africa, where the sanctions evaded by the Reaganites were welcomed by the black majority, despite the harm caused them. That criterion, regularly ignored, should be a primary factor in judging the propriety of sanctions. There is no great secret about why Washington has been looking for any excuse to impose sanctions ever since Iranians dared to overthrow the brutal tyrant imposed by the U.S.-UK coup that destroyed the Iranian parliamentary system in 1953. There is little need to tarry over the pretexts, which should shame and embarrass any honest observer. Self-exclusion. In one of the many outraged comments on the justifications of torture provided by Justice Department lawyers, Dean Harold Coe of Yale Law School, who, as an Assistant Secretary of State, had presented Washington's denunciation of all forms of torture to the international community, said that the notion that the President has the constitutional power to permit torture is like saying he has the constitutional power to commit genocide. The same legal advisers should have little difficulty arguing that the President does indeed have that right, so recent practice suggests. The Torture Convention is unusual in that it was ratified, though amended by the Senate. Few international conventions on human rights are even ratified, and those few are commonly accompanied by reservations, rendering them inapplicable to the United States. They are deemed to be non-self-executing, or subject to RUDs, reservations, understandings, and declarations. This includes the Genocide Convention, which the United States finally ratified 40 years after it was drafted, but with the usual reservations. The matter reached the World Court in the context of NATO bombing of Serbia in 1999. When an international tribunal was established to try war crimes in the Balkan Wars, a group of international lawyers requested the tribunal to investigate NATO crimes during the Serbian bombing campaign, presenting documentary evidence recorded by the major international human rights organizations, along with revealing admissions by the NATO command. The prosecutors rejected the request without investigation, in violation of the statutes of the tribunal, stating that they accepted NATO assurances of good